A single bullet can change everything, not just the lives it takes, but the silence it leaves behind. In the frigid Montana wilderness, where snow erases all traces and mountains keep secrets, an old man works alone in his garage. 35 years of solitude haven't dulled his hands, or his conscience only hardened his resolve to stay forgotten. But some truths refuse to stay buried. They rise like ghosts through the snowdrifts, carried on desperate knocks at midnight and whispered confessions. They hide in leather briefcases and yellow journals. They echo in the rotors of black helicopters circling overhead, piloted by men who answer to powers that calculate human lives against profit margins. Tonight, as the storm howls across the valley, paths will cross that were never meant to meet again. Old promises will be remembered, old betrayals avenged, because in a world of corporate conspiracies and government cover-ups, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a badge. It's a man with nothing left to lose but the truth. The Montana winter had teeth, and on nights like this, those teeth sank deep. Jack Harmon felt it in his bones, all 68 years of them, as he stood at the window of his workshop, watching ice crystals form delicate patterns on the glass. Outside, wind howled across the valley, driving snow into drifts that would soon be impassable. The old barn-turned garage creaked under the assault, but Jack knew it would hold. He'd reinforced those timbers himself, year after year, just as he'd reinforced the walls he'd built around his life. He tossed another log into the pot-bellied stove that served as the workshop's only heat source. The fire flared, sending shadows dancing across the concrete floor strewn with tools, engine parts, and the half-dismantled tractor he'd been working on for Hank Peterson. The radio crackled with static between weather warnings. The storm would be one of the worst in recent memory. They said, Jack didn't need a radio to tell him that. 3 days to ride this one out, he muttered to himself, his breath visible even indoors. The isolation didn't bother him. After 35 years out here, 12 miles from the nearest town, solitude had become a comfortable companion. Better than the alternatives. Certainly better than the ghosts of his past, which tended to emerge when people were around to stir them up. Jack checked his supplies, canned goods, water, kerosene lamps, ammunition for the rifle, all arranged with military precision on sturdy shelves. Some habits never died, even decades after leaving service. Satisfied, he settled into the worn leather armchair beside the stove, a dog-eared paperback in one hand, a mug of whiskey-laced coffee in the other. The clock on the wall read 9:17 p.m. He'd wait another hour for the coffee to wear off before turning in. He never made it to page 5. The first knock was so faint he thought it might be ice falling from the eaves. The second was unmistakable, deliberate, urgent, human. Jack set down his book, frowning. No one from town would be fool enough to drive out here in this weather. The county plow wouldn't even attempt his road until morning. If then, he reached for the Winchester rifle propped against the wall, a reflex born of caution rather than fear. Moving silently despite his age, he approached the side door, the one facing away from the worst of the wind. "Who's there?" he called, voice gruff from disuse. "Please," and came a woman's voice, barely audible through the howling gale. "My car. I need help." Jack hesitated. It wouldn't be the first time someone had used a stranded motorist story as a pretext. The isolation that protected him also made his property vulnerable. Still, the voice sounded genuinely distressed, and the thought of anyone, even a potential threat, freezing to death outside his door didn't sit well. He unbolted the door and cracked it open. Rifle visible but not aimed. The wind nearly tore the heavy door from his grip as a blast of snow and frigid air burst into the workshop. Huddled against the storm stood a woman, maybe early 50s, though it was hard to tell with her face half hidden by a frost-crusted scarf. Her expensive-looking coat was inadequate for Montana weather, and she clutched a leather briefcase to her chest as though it contained something irreplaceable. Snow caked her boots and the hem of her pants. Her eyes, the only part of her face clearly visible, were sharp with intelligence and fear. "Thank God," she gasped. "I thought I'd die out there." Jack studied her a moment longer before stepping back. Come in before you freeze. She stumbled across the threshold, bringing a swirl of snowflakes with her. Jack secured the door against the storm and turned to find her standing awkwardly in the center of his workspace, dripping melted snow onto the concrete floor. "Stove's over there," he said, gesturing with the rifle before propping it back against the wall within reach, but no longer in hand. A gesture of partial trust. The woman moved toward the heat, her shoulders dropping with visible relief as warmth began to penetrate her frozen clothes. She unwound the scarf, revealing a face that confirmed Jack's age estimate. Lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and stress. Her hair, dark with threads of silver, was cut in a practical, shoulder-length style. She had the look of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "I'm Eleanor Reed," she said, extending a hand that still trembled with cold. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Harmon. Jack Harmon." He shook her hand briefly. "What are you doing out here in this weather? This isn't exactly a main road." Eleanor's gaze flicked to the rifle, then back to Jack's weathered face. "GPS navigation. It suggested this route as an alternative when the highway closed. Then the storm got worse, and my car slid off near your drive." She gestured vaguely toward the door. "It's probably buried by now," Jack grunted. It was plausible enough, though something in her manner made him wonder if there was more to the story. None of his business. He decided, come morning, he'd help dig her out, maybe jumpstart her battery and send her on her way. "You can stay until the weather breaks," he said. "Might be a couple of days. Hope wherever you're headed isn't expecting you soon." "I have some flexibility," she replied, her tone carefully neutral. Jack nodded and moved to a cabinet, retrieving a clean mug. He poured coffee from the pot on the stove, added a splash of whiskey, and handed it to her. "Drink. It'll warm you faster." Eleanor accepted the mug gratefully, cradling it between her palms. "You live out here alone, Mr. Harmon." "Just Jack. And yes." He didn't elaborate. 35 years in this remote corner of Montana had taught him the value of brevity. As Eleanor sipped her coffee, her gaze traveled over the workshop, the engine blocks in various states of disassembly, the precision tools arranged on pegboards, the detailed technical diagrams pinned to a corkboard. Her eyes lingered on a half-completed modification to a fuel injection system, recognition flickering across her features. "You're an engineer," she said. Not a question. Jack stiffened slightly. "I fix things for folks around here. Cars, tractors, whatever needs work." Eleanor nodded, but something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his modest description. She set down the coffee mug and opened her mouth to speak again when a tremendous crash against the outer wall made them both jump. Jack was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the window. Through the frosted glass, he could make out a massive, dark shape moving along the side of the building. Another crash followed, the entire structure shuddering with the impact. "What is it?" Eleanor whispered, ignoring his instruction to stay put. "Grizzly," Jack replied grimly. "Young male by the size. Probably smelled the food stores and got disoriented in the storm." The bear rammed the wall again, testing for weaknesses. Jack had reinforced most of the structure over the years, but the old loading doors at the far end of the workshop were more vulnerable. As if reading his thoughts, the animal moved in that direction, its growls audible even over the howling wind. "Those doors won't hold if he really wants in," Jack said, checking the rifle's chamber. "And I'd rather not shoot him if I don't have to." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You have another suggestion?" Jack's mind raced through options. The bear was desperate enough to approach a human structure, which meant it was either starving or injured. Either way, it wouldn't be easily scared off. "We need to create a distraction, then secure those doors better," he said, moving toward his workbench. He quickly assembled an improvised noisemaker from an air compressor, metal pipe, and a modified valve. Eleanor watched with undisguised fascination as his weathered hands worked with surprising dexterity, connecting components with practiced efficiency. I need you to open and close that valve when I give the signal, he instructed. It'll create a sound that should startle him temporarily. Meanwhile, I'll reinforce the doors with that steel bar. He pointed to a heavy length of metal propped against the wall. Eleanor nodded, accepting the responsibility without question. Jack was briefly surprised by her composure. Most city folks would be hysterical by now. They positioned themselves near the loading doors, where the bear's growls grew increasingly agitated. The animal was pawing at the seam between the doors, wood splintering under its powerful claws. Now, Jack whispered. Eleanor twisted the valve. The contraption released a burst of compressed air through the metal pipe, creating a deafening, high-pitched whistle. The bear roared in surprise and backed away from the doors. Jack immediately jammed the steel bar across the doors, securing it in brackets on either side. The bear recovered quickly, throwing its weight against the doors with renewed fury. The wood creaked ominously, but the steel bar held. That won't keep him out forever, Jack said, returning to the workbench. We need something stronger. He grabbed a propane torch and a box of metal scraps. I'm going to weld additional supports. Can you handle the rifle if necessary? Eleanor's eyes hardened with determination. Yes. Military or hunting? Both, Jack replied, not missing the implication that she had experience with firearms. Another piece of the puzzle that was Eleanor Reed. As Jack worked on reinforcing the doors, Eleanor kept watch, rifle ready. The bear continued its assault, each impact sending vibrations through the workshop. Outside, the storm raged, snow accumulating at a rate that would soon make the roads impassable for days. Jack finished welding the last support just as the bear began losing interest, its attacks becoming less frequent. Eventually, the animal moved away, its massive form disappearing into the swirling snow. He'll be back, Jack said, setting down the torch. But we should be secure enough now. Eleanor handed back the rifle, their eyes meeting briefly. That was impressive engineering for an emergency solution. Jack shrugged off the compliment, but couldn't help noticing how she'd assessed his work with a professional eye. Not my first winter out here, he said simply. They settled back by the stove, the crisis having established a tentative trust between them. Jack offered Eleanor his bed in the small attached living quarters, while he would take the cot in the workshop. She accepted gratefully, though he noticed she kept the leather briefcase close at hand when she retired. Jack didn't sleep much that night, partly from keeping watch for the bear, partly from the nagging sense that Eleanor Reed was not what she seemed. Her composure during the bear incident, her assessment of his mechanical work, her familiarity with firearms, none of it matched the profile of a random, stranded traveler. Dawn brought a temporary lull in the storm. The sky remained heavy with clouds promising more snow, but visibility had improved enough to see the extent of the accumulation. Jack's property was transformed into a landscape of sweeping white dunes. His pickup truck nothing more than a vague hump under several feet of snow. No sign of the bear, though its tracks were visible along the side of the workshop before disappearing into the nearby pines. Jack was making coffee when Eleanor emerged from the living quarters, her hair damp from using his shower. She'd changed into what looked like fresh clothes from her small travel bag. Morning, she said, accepting a mug of black coffee. Thanks for the hospitality, Jack nodded, stirring oatmeal on the stove. Storm's taking a break, but there's more coming. County plow won't make it out here for another day at least. I saw my car from the window, Eleanor said. It's completely buried. We can dig it out when the weather clears, Jack replied. Not much point before then. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, the crackling of the stove and occasional howl of wind the only sounds. Jack was just washing the dishes when the distinct rumble of engines cut through the morning quiet. His body tensed instinctively. No one from town would attempt his road in these conditions, and the county plows made a different, heavier sound. These were multiple vehicles, pushing hard through the snow. Expecting company, Eleanor asked, her voice suddenly taut. Jack moved to the window, wiping away condensation with his sleeve. What he saw made his stomach drop. 3 pickup trucks with oversized tires were forcing their way up his long driveway, men visible in the cabs. He recognized them immediately, Riley Matthews and his crew, local troublemakers who'd graduated from teenage vandalism to more serious offenses. They'd tried to rob Old Man Carlson last winter, convinced the retired postal worker had a fortune hidden in his cabin. Local problem, Jack said grimly. Stay inside. Eleanor joined him at the window, ignoring his instruction again. What do they want? Nothing good, Jack replied, reaching for his rifle. There's a rumor in town that I keep cash on the property. Most folks know better, but these idiots aren't most folks. The truck stopped about 50 yards from the workshop. 6 men climbed out, all carrying either rifles or shotguns. Riley Matthews, a heavy-set man in his 30s with a patchy beard, gestured for the others to spread out. What's the play here? Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the situation. Jack assessed their options quickly. Workshop's defensible, but I'd rather not turn this into a shootout. He moved to the workbench, gathering items with purposeful efficiency, a socket wrench, a car battery, jumper cables, a container of metal shavings. Eleanor watched with growing fascination as Jack assembled an improvised device. What are you making? Distraction? He answered simply. When I give the signal, I need you to hit the lights, then get down. Outside, Riley shouted, Harmon, we know you're in there. Open up and maybe we don't have to make this messy. Jack ignored him, connecting the final wires to his contraption. He positioned it near the side door, then motioned for Eleanor to take cover behind the heavy workbench. Ready? He asked. Eleanor nodded, hand poised over the light switch. Jack opened the side door just enough to slide the device onto the snow-covered ground. He pulled a remote starter from his pocket, the kind used for car engines, and pressed the button. Now, he shouted. Eleanor hit the lights, plunging the workshop into darkness, then ducked behind the workbench. Outside, Jack's device activated with a spectacular flash and series of deafening pops, sending sparks and metal fragments flying in all directions. The effect resembled a malfunctioning transformer exploding. Riley and his men scattered, diving for cover behind their trucks. Jack used the confusion to position himself near the main doors, rifle ready but not yet engaged. He had no desire to shoot anyone if it could be avoided. That's your only warning, Riley, Jack called out. Next one won't be just noise and light. There was a moment of tense silence, broken only by the wind. Then Riley's voice, less confident now. You're outnumbered, old man. We just want the cash. Then we're gone. There is no cash, Jack replied evenly. Never was. Now get off my property before this gets worse for everyone. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering wood near the doorframe. Jack ducked, cursing under his breath. So much for avoiding escalation. What happened next occurred so quickly that Jack barely had time to process it. Eleanor appeared beside him, a small caliber pistol in her hand where she'd been keeping it. He had no idea. Before he could stop her, she fired 3 precise shots through the narrow window beside the door. The first bullet took out the headlight on Riley's truck. The second punctured the front tire. The third shattered the side mirror, sending glass fragments across the snow. The next one won't miss you, Mr. Matthews, she called out, her voice cold and authoritative. I have excellent facial recognition software in my scope, and your identity is already being transmitted to federal authorities. You have 30 seconds to leave before we consider this an assault with deadly intent. Jack stared at her in astonishment. The woman's entire demeanor had transformed. Gone was the grateful stranded traveler, replaced by someone who clearly had tactical training and experience with high-pressure situations. Riley and his men exchanged uncertain glances. The mention of federal authorities had clearly rattled them. You're bluffing, Riley shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. 20 seconds, Eleanor replied calmly. The FBI field office in Helena is quite efficient. I'm sure they'll be interested in adding this attempted armed robbery to your existing record. That did it. Riley signaled to his men, and they piled back into their trucks. Engines revving, the vehicles reversed down the driveway, fishtailing in the deep snow before disappearing around the bend. Jack turned to Eleanor, questions forming on his lips, but she spoke first. "We should prepare for them to return with reinforcements," she said, checking the pistol's chamber with practiced ease. "Men like that rarely accept defeat graciously." "Who are you?" Jack demanded, no longer bothering with pretense. "And don't tell me you're just passing through." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I told you my real name. What I didn't mention is that until 3 weeks ago, I was the chief financial officer at Westland Defense Corporation." The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Westland, a company he hadn't allowed himself to think about for decades. The same company whose experimental aircraft design had killed a test pilot 35 years ago. The same company that had ended his engineering career when he refused to sign off on compromised safety protocols. "That's impossible," he said hoarsely. "You're too young to have been there during the X-727 incident." Eleanor finished for him. "No, I wasn't. I joined Westland 15 years ago. But I've spent the last 3 years investigating financial irregularities that led me to classified files about that very project." She held up the leather briefcase. "Files that confirm what you tried to warn them about 35 years ago, Mr. Harmon, or should I call you Major Harmon? The engineer who designed the original X-7 engine modifications and then became the scapegoat when they cut corners and people died." Jack felt as though the floor had dropped out from under him. 35 years of carefully constructed isolation, of deliberate anonymity, shattered by a few sentences from this woman's lips. "How did you find me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't easy," Eleanor admitted. "You did an excellent job of disappearing, but the irregularities I uncovered weren't just about the past. Westland is still using derivatives of that same flawed engine design in civilian aircraft, disguising the failures as maintenance issues or pilot error. There have been 17 crashes in the past decade alone." Jack sank into his chair, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical force. All these years, he'd believed his sacrifice had at least prevented further disasters. To learn that the same fatal flaws had continued claiming lives. "Why come to me?" he asked. "Why not go to the authorities?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "I tried. 2 months ago, I compiled a report and submitted it through proper channels. A week later, my office was ransacked. The next day, my car's brakes failed on the highway, a mechanical malfunction, according to the official report. The message was clear." She patted the briefcase. "So I gathered what evidence I could, erased my digital footprints, and started looking for someone who could verify the technical aspects of what I'd found. Someone who would understand exactly what Westland had done. Someone whose testimony would be unimpeachable." "And you thought that would be me?" Jack laughed bitterly. "I'm a disgraced former engineer who lives in the middle of nowhere fixing tractors. My testimony wouldn't hold up in traffic court, let alone against a defense contractor with billions in government contracts. You're the only engineer from the original project who isn't either dead or still on Westland's payroll," Eleanor countered. "And contrary to what you might think, your reputation in certain circles is still that of a principled professional who sacrificed his career rather than compromise on safety." Jack stood and paced the length of the workshop, mind racing. The past he'd tried so hard to bury had just crashed through his door, demanding to be faced. "Even if what you're saying is true," he said finally, "what do you expect me to do? It's been 35 years. I don't have any evidence, any documentation from back then." A small, enigmatic smile crossed Eleanor's face. "Are you quite sure about that, Major Harmon?" Before Jack could respond, the sound of approaching vehicles reached them again. Jack moved to the window, expecting to see Riley and his crew returning as Eleanor had predicted. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. A convoy of black SUVs was making its way up the driveway, their powerful engines having little trouble with the snow. They moved with military precision, forming a semicircle around the workshop. Men in tactical gear emerged, positioning themselves strategically around the perimeter. From the lead vehicle stepped a tall, distinguished man in his 70s, silver-haired and impeccably dressed despite the harsh weather. Even after 35 years, Jack recognized him immediately. "Victor," he breathed, the name like ashes in his mouth. Eleanor joined him at the window, her face paling. Victor Chambers, former CEO of Westland, now senior senator from Virginia and member of the Armed Services Committee, and the man who buried the truth about the X-727 crash, Jack added grimly. "Also my former roommate at MIT. Eleanor's head snapped toward him, surprise evident in her expression. "You knew him personally, that wasn't in any of the files." "There's a lot that never made it into the files," Jack replied, watching as Victor surveyed the property with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "Like how he recruited me to Westland, straight out of the Air Force, promising we'd revolutionize aviation safety together." The irony of that long-ago promise hung heavy in the air between them. Victor approached the workshop alone, hands visible to show he was unarmed. He stopped about 20 feet from the door, looking directly at the window where Jack stood. "Jack," he called, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. "It's been a long time. We need to talk." Jack remained motionless, memories flooding back late nights in the lab, theoretical discussions over beers, the gradual erosion of principles in favor of profit margins and military contracts. Victor had changed over the years, becoming the very thing they had once mocked and criticized as idealistic young engineers. "What's your play here?" Eleanor asked quietly. "He's got us surrounded, and that's not just a security detail out there. Those are private military contractors." Jack knew she was right. This wasn't going to end with a friendly chat about old times. Victor hadn't come all this way through a Montana blizzard for a reunion. "We need leverage," Jack muttered, mind working through options. Then, making a decision. He moved to the far corner of the workshop where a battered metal filing cabinet stood. He pulled a key from around his neck and unlocked the bottom drawer, extracting a small leather-bound journal. "What's that?" Eleanor asked. "Insurance," Jack replied grimly. "Victor always thought I was sentimental. He's right, but not in the way he imagines." Jack flipped through the journal. Finding the page, he saw a detailed schematic drawn in his own hand, dated 3 days before the X-727 crash. Attached to it was a signed memo from Victor himself, acknowledging the design flaw Jack had identified and ordering the test to proceed anyway due to budgetary and timeline considerations. "I kept a record of everything," Jack explained, showing Eleanor the evidence. "Every meeting, every modification, every warning I issued. When they forced me out, I took it with me. Victor thinks all copies of these documents were destroyed in the cover-up." Eleanor's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "This is the smoking gun. With this and the financial records I've compiled, we can prove not only the original negligence, but the ongoing cover-up," Jack finished. "But first, we have to get out of here alive." Victor's voice came again, more insistent now. "Jack, be reasonable. We both know how this ends if you don't cooperate. I'm offering you a chance to resolve this amicably." Jack moved to the door, standing just inside. "What do you want?" "Victor," he called through the closed door. "The same thing I've always wanted to protect our nation's interests," Victor replied smoothly. "Ms. Reed has stolen classified documents that could compromise national security. Return them, and we can discuss appropriate compensation for your discretion." Jack's jaw tightened. The same old justifications. The same manipulation of patriotism to cover corporate malfeasance. "And if I don't," he challenged. Victor's sigh was audible even through the door. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to take more direct measures to recover the documents. I'd prefer to avoid that, especially given our history." Jack glanced at Eleanor, who stood resolute despite the clear threat. He thought of the journal in his hands, of the lives lost because profit margins had been prioritized over safety, of his own lost career, his failed marriage, His estranged daughter, all sacrificed for principles that apparently hadn't changed anything in the end, but perhaps now they could. "I need time to consider your offer," Jack called back, playing for time. "Give me an hour." "You have 30 minutes, Victor replied, checking his watch. "Not a second more." As Victor returned to his vehicle, Jack turned to Eleanor. "We need to get to my truck. It's our only way out of here." "It's buried under 3 feet of snow," she pointed out. A slight smile crossed Jack's weathered face. "That's what they're meant to think." He led her to a concealed trapdoor beneath a workbench, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Jack grabbed a flashlight and motioned for her to follow. "Where does this go?" Eleanor asked, clutching her briefcase. "To the reason I chose this particular property 35 years ago," Jack replied, his voice echoing in the confined space. The previous owner was a bit paranoid about nuclear war, built himself quite the elaborate shelter system. The stairs opened into a surprisingly large underground spaceport bunker, part workshop, part living quarters. But what caught Eleanor's attention was the modified pickup truck parked in a spacious garage area, accessible via a camouflage ramp that led up to what appeared to be the floor of a dilapidated barn about 50 yards from the main workshop. "They're watching the wrong building," she realized, admiration in her voice. "Exactly," Jack confirmed, already checking the truck systems. "This old girl has a few modifications that aren't in the factory specs. 4-wheel drive, reinforced chassis, extra fuel capacity, and some other features that might come in handy." He opened a metal cabinet revealing an impressive arsenal: rifles, shotguns, and handguns, all meticulously maintained. At Eleanor's raised eyebrow, he shrugged. "Like I said, the previous owner was paranoid. I just never saw a reason to get rid of his collection." As Jack loaded weapons and supplies into the truck, Eleanor explored the bunker, her attention caught by a wall covered in newspaper clippings, photographs, and maps. Every commercial airline crash from the past 3 decades was documented, with particular focus on incidents involving aircraft with Westland components. "You've been tracking them all this time," she said softly. Jack paused, glancing at the wall. Needed to know if my warnings had meant anything. Turns out they didn't. Eleanor placed a hand on his arm. "They will now." The sound of movement above interrupted them. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as heavy footsteps crossed the workshop floor. "Our 30 minutes must be up," Jack said grimly. "Time to go." They climbed into the truck, Jack behind the wheel. He pressed a button on the dashboard, and the hidden ramp began to rise, revealing daylight at the end of a short tunnel. "Hold on," he warned, starting the engine. "This might get rough." The truck surged forward, climbing the ramp and bursting through the weathered doors of the old barn. Snow swirled around them as they emerged into the daylight, momentarily invisible to Victor's men, who were focused on the main workshop. Jack gunned the engine, the truck plowing through snowdrifts with surprising ease. They were halfway to the tree line before shouts of alarm rose behind them. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the truck's reinforced body. "Get down," Jack ordered, swerving to present a more difficult target. Eleanor crouched in her seat but kept her eyes on the side mirror. "They're mobilizing to follow," she reported. "2 SUVs, coming fast." Jack's weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced confidence as he navigated through the snow-laden forest. "They might have horsepower, but they don't know these woods," he said. "There's an old logging road about a quarter-mile ahead that'll take us to the county highway." More bullets struck the truck, one shattering the side mirror. Jack maintained his focus, weaving between trees with remarkable precision for a man his age. Decades of navigating these back roads through Montana winters had given him an advantage no amount of tactical training could match. They broke through the tree line onto the logging road, the truck fishtailing briefly before Jack regained control. Behind them, the SUV struggled to follow, their city tires less effective in the deep snow, despite their 4-wheel drive. "We might make it," Eleanor said, a note of hope in her voice. That hope was short-lived. As they rounded a bend, a figure stumbled into the road ahead, waving frantically for them to stop. A man in his mid-40s, his face bloodied, his arm clearly injured. "It could be a trap," Eleanor warned, hand moving to her pistol. Jack slowed nonetheless. Unable to bring himself to leave someone to freeze in the wilderness, trap or not, he approached cautiously, ready to accelerate past if necessary. The man collapsed to his knees in the snow, genuine pain etched across his features. Jack stopped the truck about 20 feet away, engine running. "Who are you?" he called through the cracked window. "Samuel Hayes," the man gasped, clutching his injured arm. "My car went off the road back there. Please. I think my arm's broken." Jack and Eleanor exchanged a quick glance. The pursuing SUVs would be upon them any minute. "We have people after us," Jack warned. "Dangerous people. If you come with us, you're putting yourself at risk." Samuel's eyes widened, but desperation won out over caution. "I'll take my chances against people rather than freezing to death out here." Decision made. Jack unlocked the rear door. "Get in, quickly." Samuel scrambled into the back seat just as the sound of engines grew louder behind them. Jack floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward as bullets began to pepper the snow around them. "What the hell did I just get into?" Samuel gasped, ducking low in the seat. "Long story," Jack replied, focused on the treacherous road ahead. "Short version: corporate conspiracy, cover-up, and a whole lot of people with guns who want what we have." "Great," Samuel muttered, wincing as the truck bounced over a rough patch. "And here I thought breaking my arm was going to be the worst part of my day." Eleanor turned to examine his injury. "It looks dislocated, not broken. I can help with that, but it's going to hurt." Before Samuel could protest, she took his arm and, with practiced efficiency, manipulated the joint back into place. His scream was cut short as relief flooded through him, the worst of the pain immediately subsiding. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked when breathing heavily. "First aid course," Eleanor replied smoothly, though Jack noted it was performed with more confidence than any first aid course would teach. Samuel studied them both, clearly reassessing his situation. "You're not just random Good Samaritans, are you?" "Afraid not," Jack confirmed, checking the rearview mirror. The SUVs had fallen back but were still visible through the swirling snow. "I'm Jack. This is Eleanor, and we're in a bit of a situation." "I gathered that from the gunfire," Samuel said dryly. "Mind telling me who's shooting at us?" "Private security working for Westland Defense Corporation," Eleanor explained, keeping her briefcase close. "They're trying to recover evidence of corporate negligence and fraud." Something changed in Samuel's expression at the mention of Westland. A shadow crossed his features, quickly masked, but not before Jack caught it in the rearview mirror. "What's your connection to Westland?" Jack asked sharply, instinct suddenly on alert. Samuel hesitated, then sighed. "My brother was Brian Hayes, the test pilot who died in the X-727 crash 35 years ago." The truck swerved slightly as Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. "Hayes," he repeated, the name stirring old memories. "I remember him. Good pilot. Steady hands. Didn't deserve what happened to him." "No, he didn't," Samuel agreed, his voice tight with old grief. "The official report said pilot error, but my family never believed it. Brian was too skilled, too careful." "It wasn't pilot error," Jack said quietly. "The engine modifications failed exactly as I had warned they might. The thrust vectoring system destabilized at high altitude, and the backup systems were inadequate." Samuel stared at him, realization dawning. "You were involved with the project." "I designed the original engine modifications," Jack confirmed. "And when I identified the flaws, I recommended scrapping the test flight until they could be fixed. My concerns were overruled for budgetary reasons." The revelation hung in the air between them, decades of secrets suddenly exposed. Samuel's next question was inevitable. "If you knew the truth, why didn't you come forward?" "My parents spent years fighting for an investigation. My mother still writes letters to congressmen demanding answers." Jack's face was a mask of regret. "I tried. They buried my reports, classified everything, and made it clear that if I pushed, I'd face more than just the end of my career. By the time I realized how deep the cover-up went, it was too late. The best I could do was disappear with what evidence I had. Eleanor interjected gently. The evidence he preserved may finally bring justice for your brother. Mr. Hayes, that's what we're fighting for now. Samuel absorbed this, emotions warring across his features. My car accident wasn't an accident. Was it? I was on my way to Helena to meet with a journalist about Westland's safety record. Someone must have followed me. Probably the same people following us, Jack confirmed, glancing again at the rearview mirror. The SUVs had fallen further behind, but he harbored no illusions. They had given up. Victor Chambers doesn't leave loose ends. Victor Chambers, Samuel's voice rose in disbelief. The senator, the same, Eleanor said grimly. Former CEO of Westland and the man who orchestrated the cover-up of your brother's death. As they crested a hill, the county highway came into view below them, a ribbon of partially cleared asphalt cutting through the snow-covered landscape. Freedom, or at least the next stage of their escape, was tantalizingly close. Then Jack spotted it, another black SUV parked across the highway, blocking their path. Men in tactical gear positioned behind it, weapons ready. Roadblock, he announced tersely, slowing the truck. They anticipated our route. Can we go around? Eleanor asked, scanning for alternatives. Jack assessed their options quickly. Not on the road, but I know these hills. He turned to Samuel. How's that arm feeling? Things are about to get bumpy. Do what you need to do, Samuel replied, determination replacing the shock in his eyes. I've waited 35 years for answers about my brother. I'm not backing out now. Jack nodded and spun the wheel, taking the truck off the logging road and into the thick forest. The vehicle bounced and jolted over the uneven terrain, snow spraying from beneath the tires. Behind them, the pursuing SUVs hesitated at the edge of the tree line, their drivers clearly reluctant to follow into such challenging territory. They'll radio the roadblock. Try to cut us off further ahead, Eleanor predicted, bracing herself against the dashboard as the truck navigated between tall pines. I'm counting on it, Jack replied with grim satisfaction. They'll be looking for us on the other access roads, but they don't know about the old mine entrance. He guided the truck deeper into the forest, following what appeared to be a game trail, but was actually the remnants of a narrow access road, long abandoned and reclaimed by nature. The trees pressed close on either side, branches scraping against the windows. Visibility was limited by the continuing snowfall, but Jack drove with the confidence of someone who had traveled this route many times. After 20 minutes of tense progress through increasingly difficult terrain, they emerged into a small clearing. At the far end stood what looked like a collapsed mine entrance, wooden supports rotted and partially buried under decades of debris. Dead end, Samuel observed, anxiety creeping into his voice. Jack smiled slightly. Not exactly. He drove straight toward the mine entrance, stopping just short of the collapsed timbers. Leaning out the window, he moved aside a fallen log to reveal a metal box with a keypad. Jack punched in a code, and the ground in front of them began to shift. What had appeared to be a collapsed mine entrance was actually a carefully disguised door, which now slid aside to reveal a tunnel leading into the hillside. Another bunker? Eleanor asked, impressed despite herself. The previous owner was thorough, Jack replied, easing the truck into the tunnel. This was originally a silver mine back in the 1890s. He converted part of it into an escape route, connected to the main bunker system by a series of tunnels. As they entered, lights activated automatically along the ceiling of the surprisingly well-maintained passage. The door closed behind them, shutting out the howling wind and pursuing forces. This will take us under the mountain and emerge about 5 miles from here, Jack explained, navigating the tunnel at a careful pace. From there, we can reach the state highway without using any of the routes they'll be watching. Samuel shook his head in amazement. You've been preparing for this day for 35 years, haven't you? Not specifically this day, Jack admitted, but I always knew there was a chance the past would catch up eventually. Victor isn't the type to leave unfinished business. Speaking of unfinished business, Eleanor said, her tone businesslike, once we reach the highway, what's the plan? We still need to get this evidence to people who can use it. Jack nodded thoughtfully. I have a contact in Colorado, former JAG lawyer, who now specializes in whistleblower cases. If we can reach him, he might be able to help us navigate the legal aspects of this. Colorado's a long drive in this weather, Samuel pointed out, and they'll be watching the major routes. True, Jack agreed, but they'll be expecting us to head straight there. Instead, we'll take a detour through Wyoming, using the back roads. It'll add time, but improve our chances of making it. Eleanor opened her briefcase, extracting a secure satellite phone. I have some contacts of my own journalists who can create enough public pressure to prevent Westland from simply burying this again. But I'll need a secure connection to reach them. The next bunker has communications equipment, Jack assured her. Not state-of-the-art, but functional and, more importantly, untraceable. As they continued through the tunnel, the reality of their situation settled over them, three strangers, bound together by decades-old secrets and a common enemy. Each had their own reasons for fighting Jack, seeking redemption for his silence. Eleanor exposing the corruption she'd discovered, and Samuel pursuing justice for his brother's death. The tunnel began to slope upward, signaling they were nearing the exit. Jack slowed the truck, approaching cautiously. Let me check for pursuers before we emerge, he said, stopping near the exit. He pulled a periscope-like device from under the seat, another of the previous owner's paranoid innovations, and extended it through a small port in the ceiling. What he saw made him curse softly. We've got company waiting. Not Westland's people, looks like Riley Matthews and his crew. They must have followed our tracks to this area before the fresh snow covered them. The local troublemakers from earlier, Eleanor clarified, recalling the morning's confrontation. The same, Jack confirmed. 6 of them, armed, watching the exit. They probably don't know exactly what they're looking for, but they're watching for movement. Can we wait them out? Samuel suggested. Jack shook his head. Not with Victor's people combing the area. Sooner or later, they'll find this entrance too. He thought for a moment, then turned to Eleanor. How good are you with that pistol when it counts? Good enough, she replied without hesitation. Military or agency? Jack raised an eyebrow. That obvious to someone who's worked with both, she answered with a slight smile. CIA, Counterintelligence Division, before I moved to the private sector. Your turn. Air Force, Special Operations, before they recruited me for the engineering division, Jack admitted. Haven't been in the field for decades, but some skills you don't forget. Samuel looked between them with growing astonishment. And here I thought I was getting a ride from a mechanic and an accountant. Jack smiled grimly. Riley and his boys are about to make the same mistake. He outlined his plan quickly, assigning roles based on their capabilities. Despite the years since his active service, the tactical thinking came back naturally, like slipping into a familiar pair of boots. Eleanor checked her weapon with practiced efficiency. Ready when you are. Jack took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. For 35 years, he'd hidden from his past, buried himself in anonymity and isolation. Now, in the space of a day, he was thrust back into the world of conflict and conspiracy he'd left behind. But this time, he wasn't running away from the truth. He was running toward it, with the evidence that might finally set things right. Let's go, he said, starting the engine. The truck burst from the hidden entrance in a shower of snow and ice, catching Riley's group completely by surprise. Jack swerved hard, using the vehicle as a battering ram to scatter the men before they could organize a response. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the reinforced chassis. Eleanor leaned out the window, firing precise shots that forced Riley and his men to dive for cover, not aiming to kill, but to disrupt and disorient. The truck fishtailed through the deep snow, Jack wrestling with the wheel to maintain control. A bullet shattered the rear window, showering Samuel with glass. He ducked, cursing through gritted teeth. They broke through the perimeter of Riley's hastily established position, speeding toward the tree line beyond. Behind them, the would-be robbers scrambled to their vehicles, intent on pursuit. "We've got about a 2-minute head start," Jack calculated, pushing the truck to its limits on the uneven terrain. "Need to make it count." He navigated through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and gully, gradually increasing the distance between them and their pursuers. Riley's trucks, while rugged, lacked the specialized modifications Jack had made to his vehicle, giving them a crucial advantage in the deep snow. As they approached a frozen creek, Jack made a split-second decision. Instead of crossing at the obvious ford, he turned sharply, driving directly onto the ice-covered surface. The truck slid momentarily before the specialized tires found purchase. "What are you doing?" Samuel asked, alarm evident in his voice. "If that ice breaks, it won't," Jack assured him, though the confidence in his voice exceeded his actual certainty. "And they won't expect this route." He was right on both counts. The ice held, and when Riley's trucks reached the creek minutes later, they hesitated at the bank, unwilling to risk the crossing. By then, Jack had guided them to the opposite shore and back into the cover of the forest. "I think we've lost them," Eleanor reported, watching through the cracked side mirror. "For now, at least," Jack nodded, maintaining their pace. "We're not in the clear yet. The state highway is still 10 miles away, and Victor's people will have established checkpoints by now. So what's our next move?" Samuel asked, cradling his injured arm. Before Jack could answer, they emerged from a dense patch of trees into a small clearing and found themselves face to face with an elderly woman struggling through the snow. She wore a heavy coat but was clearly exhausted, her face reddened from cold and exertion. Jack braked carefully, bringing the truck to a stop. The woman looked up, hope and wariness warring in her expression. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Jack called through the window, scanning the area for signs of a vehicle or companions. "My car slid off the road a mile back," she replied, her voice shaking from cold. "I've been walking for hours trying to find help." Jack and Eleanor exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing: another stranded motorist in this remote area, on the same day they were fleeing pursuers, seemed too coincidental. "What's your name?" Jack asked, maintaining a cautious distance. "Martha Collins," the woman answered, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. "I was on my way to Washington when the storm hit. Please, I'm freezing." The name triggered something in Samuel's memory. He leaned forward, studying the woman's face. "Martha Collins," he repeated, "from Minneapolis." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, do I know you?" Samuel's face paled. "Mrs. Collins, I'm Samuel Hayes, Brian's brother." The transformation in Martha's expression was immediate shock, recognition, and a sudden, devastating understanding. "Samuel," she whispered, "after all these years." Jack's suspicions gave way to realization. "You're Brian Hayes' mother." Martha nodded, tears forming in her eyes despite the bitter cold. "I never stopped fighting for the truth about what happened to my son. And now, after all this time." She looked at each of them in turn, connecting the pieces of an impossible coincidence. "You know something, don't you, about what really happened?" The weight of the moment settled over the truck's occupants. 35 years of secrets, cover-ups, and lost justice had led to this improbable meeting in the Montana wilderness. Jack made his decision. He opened the door and stepped out into the snow, extending his hand to Martha. "Mrs. Collins, I'm Jack Harmon. I was the engineer who designed the system that failed on your son's aircraft, and I think it's long past time you heard the truth." As Martha took his hand, her eyes filled with the tears she'd held back for decades, Jack knew there was no turning back. The past had finally caught up with him, bringing not just danger, but the chance for redemption. The storm was far from over. Victor's forces were still hunting them. Riley's crew might regroup, and the evidence they carried was still vulnerable, but for the first time in 35 years, Jack felt something he'd thought long lost: purpose. He helped Martha into the truck, where Samuel embraced her despite his injured arm. The reunion of two people connected by loss, finally brought together by the very forces that had kept the truth buried for so long. "We need to keep moving," Jack said, climbing back behind the wheel. "Victor won't stop until he has what we're carrying." "Sucker to Rachel." "Then we don't stop either," Eleanor replied with quiet determination. "Not until the truth is known." Jack nodded, putting the truck in gear. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they faced it together, a mechanic with a secret past, a whistleblower with crucial evidence, a pilot's brother seeking justice, and a mother who had never stopped fighting for her son. Four strangers connected by a decades-old tragedy, now united in a desperate bid to finally expose the truth. As the truck disappeared into the swirling snow, the storm closed in behind them, covering their tracks. But some things could no longer remain buried, no matter how deep the snow or how powerful those who wished them forgotten. The truth was in motion now, like an avalanche that could no longer be stopped. And for Jack Harmon, after 35 years of silence, that was worth any risk that lay ahead. The state highway stretched before them like a lifeline, a cleared ribbon of asphalt cutting through the endless white. Jack maintained a steady pace, keeping the truck just below the speed limit, fast enough to make progress, but not so fast as to attract attention. In the passenger seat, Eleanor worked her satellite phone, speaking in hushed tones to contacts who might provide support when they reached their destination. Samuel and Martha sat in the back, decades of questions and grief flowing between them in quiet conversation. Jack checked the rearview mirror for the 100th time, scanning for the telltale black SUVs of Victor's security team. So far, they'd managed to evade pursuit by sticking to secondary roads, but he harbored no illusions about their safety. Victor Chambers had resources, influence, and a powerful motivation to silence them. "My contact at the Denver Post is standing by," Eleanor reported, ending her call. "He'll meet us at a secure location once we reach Colorado. No digital communication until then. Victor's people have too many ears in the telecommunications network." Jack nodded, eyes fixed on the road. "We'll need to avoid the main border crossing into Wyoming. They'll have people watching." "There's an old ranch road near the Beartooth Mountains," Samuel suggested. "Used to use it when I was flying cargo routes in this region. Crosses the state line with minimal visibility." "Good thinking," Jack agreed, mentally adjusting their route. "We'll need to refuel before attempting it, though. This old girl drinks gas, especially in these conditions." As if on cue, the fuel gauge dipped toward the quarter tank mark. Jack scanned the highway signs, spotting one for a gas station at the next exit. A small, independent place called Miller's Stop and Go, exactly the kind of establishment that might not have the latest security cameras or credit card systems that could be traced. "We'll stop there," he decided. "Quick in and out. Cash only. No names." Eleanor nodded, already counting bills from an envelope in her briefcase. Martha leaned forward from the back seat, her face lined with concern. "Will they be looking for me too?" she asked. "I was headed to Washington to meet with a congressional aide about reopening the investigation into Brian's crash. If they've been monitoring communications about Westland, we have to assume they know about your meeting," Jack confirmed grimly, "which means they may have your description. Best if you stay in the truck while we refuel." Martha's jaw set with determination that reminded Jack painfully of her son. The same resolve, the same unwillingness to back down. "I've been fighting this battle for 35 years. Mr. Harmon, I'm not hiding now." Before Jack could argue, Samuel laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Mom, please, just this once. We've come too far to risk everything now." The familiar address Mom seemed to catch Martha off guard. Her expression softened, and she nodded reluctantly. "All right, but only because you asked. Samuel." They pulled into Miller's Stop and Go, a weathered establishment with 2 ancient pumps and a small convenience store. No other vehicles were present, just an old pickup parked behind the building, presumably belonging to the attendant. Jack positioned the truck so Martha was hidden from view of the store's windows. I'll pump. You pay, he told Eleanor. Samuel, keep watch. If anything feels wrong, anything at all, we leave immediately. They moved with quiet efficiency, each understanding the stakes. Jack began filling the tank while Eleanor entered the store, maintaining a casual demeanor that belied their situation. Samuel stood by the truck's passenger door, scanning the highway and surrounding area. His injured arm now properly bandaged thanks to a first aid kit they'd found in one of Jack's storage compartments. The fuel pump clicked off, and Jack replaced the nozzle, screwing the gas cap back into place. Through the store window, he could see Eleanor at the counter, smiling pleasantly at the middle-aged attendant as she counted out cash. Everything seemed normal, perhaps too normal, given their circumstances. Then he noticed the black sedan pulling into the lot. Samuel, Jack said quietly, not taking his eyes off the vehicle. Get in the truck. Start the engine when I give the signal. Samuel followed his gaze, immediately understanding. He slipped into the driver's seat, careful not to alarm Martha. Jack moved casually toward the store entrance, positioning himself to intercept whoever emerged from the sedan. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their demeanor immediately setting off warning bells in Jack's mind. They moved with the coordinated precision of trained operatives, not random travelers. One headed for the store while the other circled around toward their truck. Jack entered the store just as Eleanor was finishing her transaction. He caught her eye in the reflection of a cooler door, giving a subtle nod toward the sedan outside. She didn't miss a beat, continuing her friendly chatter with the attendant while sliding her hand into her jacket pocket where her pistol waited. The bell above the door jingled as the first man entered. He glanced at Jack, then at Eleanor, his gaze lingering just a moment too long on her face. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Now, Jack said quietly. Eleanor moved first, drawing her weapon and leveling it at the operative. Don't, she warned, her voice deadly calm. The man froze, hands instinctively rising. The store attendant ducked behind the counter with a startled cry. Outside, the second operative was approaching the truck when the engine roared to life. Samuel had received the signal. Your colleague has about 5 seconds to back away from our vehicle, Jack informed the man, his tone conversational but eyes hard as steel. After that, things get complicated. The operative assessed his options with professional detachment. 2 against 1 inside, his partner potentially exposed outside. We just want to talk, he said finally. Senator Chambers is willing to negotiate. The time for negotiation was 35 years ago, Jack replied coldly. Tell Victor he had his chance. Now the truth comes out. Eleanor kept her weapon trained on the man as she backed toward the door. Have your partner step away from the truck. Slowly. The operative gave a slight nod, then called out to his colleague. Stand down. Phillips. Not here. The second man hesitated, then stepped back from the truck, hands visible at his sides. Jack and Eleanor used the moment to exit the store, backing toward their vehicle while maintaining visual contact with both operatives. This doesn't end here, the first man called after them. You know that, right? Jack opened the passenger door as Samuel slid back to make room. That's exactly what we're counting on, he replied, before they pulled away, tires kicking up slush as they accelerated back onto the highway. They found us too quickly, Eleanor observed, holstering her weapon. Someone must have spotted us on the state highway and called it in. We need to get off the main roads, Jack agreed, taking over the driving from Samuel. The ranch crossing you mentioned how far? About 50 miles east, Samuel replied. Unmarked dirt road, easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Martha leaned forward, her face pale but resolute. Those men, they worked for Victor Chambers. Jack nodded grimly. Private security, probably ex-military or intelligence. Victor doesn't hire amateurs. All these years, Martha murmured, shaking her head in disbelief. I wrote letters, filed petitions, even camped outside his office once. He always sent aides with condolences and promises of looking into it. And all this time, he was orchestrating the cover-up, Jack finished for her. But it's bigger than just the X-727 crash now. The modified engines are still in use in civilian aircraft. Martha's eyes widened with horror. Other families, other sons and daughters. 17 crashes in the past decade, Eleanor confirmed, her voice tight. All attributed to pilot error or maintenance issues, all involving aircraft with Westland components. The weight of those deaths settled over the truck's occupants, adding urgency to their already desperate mission. They weren't just seeking justice for Brian Hayes anymore. They were racing to prevent future tragedies. Jack turned the truck onto a smaller highway, following Samuel's directions. The landscape grew more rugged, mountains rising in the distance, their peaks shrouded in clouds heavy with snow. Weather reports on the radio warned of another storm system approaching from the west, promising to make their journey even more treacherous. As they drove, Eleanor opened her briefcase again, extracting a tablet computer. "I need to show you something," she said to Jack. "Financial records from Westland's Classified Projects Division." She pulled up a series of spreadsheets, pointing to specific entries. These are maintenance cost projections for commercial aircraft using the XV-7 derivative engines. Notice anything unusual? Jack glanced at the screen, his engineer's mind quickly processing the data. The failure rate projections, they're calculating expected component failures at nearly 3 times the industry standard, and the liability reserve funds are enough to cover settlements for approximately 20 fatal crashes per year. Eleanor finished. They're not just aware of the design flaws, they've built the expected deaths into their business model. The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. He'd suspected corporate negligence, cost-cutting at the expense of safety. But this was something far worse, a cold, calculated decision to allow people to die rather than recall and replace the faulty engines. "Why?" Samuel asked, leaning forward to see the screen. "Why not just fix the design? Surely the liability costs alone are less than the cost of a full recall and replacement program," Eleanor explained grimly. "Plus, admitting the flaw now would expose them to criminal charges for the cover-up. They've painted themselves into a corner where continuing to hide the truth seems like the only viable option." Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Victor always was good at math," he said bitterly. "Everything reduced to numbers on a balance sheet. Even human lives." Martha's voice came softly from the back seat. "My Brian was just the first entry in their ledger. Wasn't he?" No one answered. The truth was too painful, too monstrous to acknowledge directly. Instead, they drove in silence as the mountains grew larger before them, the road narrowing as it wound into more remote territory. After nearly an hour, Samuel pointed to an unmarked turnoff, partly obscured by overgrown brush. "There! That's the ranch road." Jack slowed, checking for any signs of surveillance before turning onto the dirt track. The truck bounced over ruts frozen solid by the cold, winding between rocky outcroppings and stands of pine. Progress was slow, the terrain challenging even for the modified vehicle. "How did you discover this route?" Jack asked, navigating around a particularly deep gully. "Used to fly supplies to some of the remote ranches in this area," Samuel explained. "One winter, we got grounded by weather similar to this. The rancher showed me this back way, said his grandfather used it to move cattle across the state line without paying fees during the Depression. The road, little more than a pair of tire tracks through the wilderness, crested a ridge and began descending into a narrow valley. Ahead, a wooden sign riddled with bullet holes marked the Wyoming state line. They had made it across the border undetected, or so they thought. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence, the bullet striking the ground just ahead of their front tire. Jack swerved instinctively, scanning the ridgeline for the shooter. "Get down," he shouted, as another shot pinged off the truck's hood. Eleanor drew her pistol, though it would be useless against a sniper at this range. "Where are they?" Jack pointed to a rocky outcropping about 400 yards back, a perfect vantage point overlooking the valley. A muzzle flash confirmed his assessment as another shot narrowly missed the truck's tire. "They're not trying to kill us," he realized. "They're trying to disable the vehicle. Force us to stop." "Riley's crew," Samuel suggested, shielding Martha with his body as best he could. Jack shook his head. "Too precise. Military training. Has to be Victor's people." He pressed the accelerator, pushing the truck as fast as he dared on the uneven terrain. They must have spotted us from the air and inserted a team ahead of us. There! Eleanor pointed to a black helicopter appearing over the ridge. Its sleek profile unmistakably military grade, despite the lack of official markings. Private military contractors, Jack confirmed grimly. Victor's pulling out all the stops. The helicopter swooped lower, positioning itself to cut off their escape route. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, sniper fire from behind, aircraft ahead, and rugged terrain on all sides limiting their options. Jack assessed their chances with the cold calculation of his military training. The odds weren't good. The truck, while sturdy, couldn't outrun a helicopter. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Then he spotted a dark opening in the rock face to their left. An old mine entrance, partially collapsed but still passable for a vehicle their size. "Hold on," he warned, spinning the wheel sharply. The truck lurched off the dirt track, bouncing violently as it crossed the uneven ground toward the mine. Behind them, the sniper adjusted his aim, firing rapidly now as he realized their intention. The helicopter pilot also recognized the threat, banking sharply to cut them off. It became a race, the truck plowing through snow and scrub brush, the helicopter descending rapidly, the sniper's bullets kicking up dirt around them. Jack pushed the engine to its limits, the chassis groaning under the strain. They reached the mine entrance seconds before the helicopter could position itself to block them. Jack didn't slow, driving straight into the darkness as bullets ricocheted off the rock face around them. The headlights illuminated a narrow tunnel extending deep into the mountain, support beams sagging ominously overhead. "Are you insane?" Samuel gasped as they plunged deeper into the mine. "This whole place could collapse." "Probably," Jack agreed, not slowing. "But they can't follow us in here with the helicopter, and the sniper's lost his shot." The tunnel narrowed further, forcing Jack to reduce speed. The headlights revealed mining equipment abandoned decades ago, rusted ore carts, and the occasional side tunnel branching off into impenetrable darkness. Water dripped from the ceiling, forming icicles that scraped against the truck's roof. "Do you know where this leads?" Eleanor asked, bracing herself against the dashboard as they navigated the treacherous passage. "Not exactly," Jack admitted. "But most of these old mines follow the ore veins down and out the other side of the mountain. We just need to find the exit before—" A rumble interrupted him, dust and small rocks showering down from the ceiling. The vibrations of their vehicle, combined with the helicopter's noise outside, were destabilizing the already precarious mine structure. "Before that happens," he finished grimly, accelerating slightly despite the danger. They pushed deeper into the mountain, the tunnel occasionally widening into larger chambers, where the mining operation had extracted significant deposits. In one such space, Jack stopped the truck, dousing the headlights. "We need to assess our situation," he explained, reaching for a powerful flashlight in the glove compartment. "Everyone okay?" Martha nodded shakily, her face pale but composed. Samuel winced as he adjusted his position, his injured arm clearly causing him pain despite the makeshift sling. Eleanor was already checking her weapon and scanning their surroundings with a professional eye. "The good news is they can't follow us in vehicles," Jack continued, shining the flashlight around the chamber. "The bad news is we're in an unstable mine with limited visibility and no clear exit. And they'll have people waiting when we emerge," Eleanor added pragmatically. "Assuming we find a way out." Jack played the flashlight beam across the far wall, where several tunnel openings beckoned. Mining operations this size typically had multiple access points for ventilation, if nothing else. "We just need to find one that hasn't collapsed and leads in the right direction." Samuel pointed to markings on the support beams. "Those are old miners' signs. My grandfather worked these mountains back in the 30s. Taught me some of their code." He studied the faded symbols. "That one indicates a ventilation shaft. And that one, I think it marks a secondary exit." Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "Good eye. Which tunnel?" Samuel pointed to the second opening from the left. That one. If I'm reading the signs correctly. They returned to the truck, proceeding cautiously down the indicated tunnel. The passage twisted and turned, following the contours of the mountain. Twice they had to clear minor rock falls blocking their path, working quickly while trying not to trigger further collapses. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 30 minutes, they detected a faint current of fresh air. The tunnel began to slope upward, and eventually, they glimpsed natural light filtering through a partially obstructed opening ahead. Jack stopped the truck a short distance from the exit, shutting off the engine. "I'll check it out first," he said, retrieving the rifle from behind the seat. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, we're coming after you." Eleanor finished firmly. Jack nodded, acknowledging both her support and her capability. He moved silently toward the mine entrance, years of military training returning as though he had never left the service. At the opening, he crouched low, surveying the landscape beyond. The mine exited into a small canyon on the opposite side of the mountain from where they had entered. Snow was falling again, reducing visibility, which worked in their favor. No immediate signs of Victor's men, though that didn't mean they weren't out there. Jack was about to return to the truck when he spotted movement, a flash of dark clothing against the white snow, about 100 yards down the canyon. He froze, watching as a figure in tactical gear moved into position behind a boulder, rifle at the ready. They had been anticipated after all. The question was how many more were out there. He retreated to the truck, explaining the situation in hushed tones. "At least one sniper covering the exit. Probably more we can't see." "Options?" Eleanor asked, automatically falling into the clipped speech patterns of operational planning. Jack considered their limited choices. "We could wait them out, but we don't have supplies for an extended stay, and Samuel's arm needs proper medical attention. We could try finding another exit, but that would mean abandoning the truck and proceeding on foot through the storm." "Or," Martha prompted, sensing there was a third option he was reluctant to suggest. "Or we create a diversion," Jack said slowly. "Something to draw their attention while we make a run for it." "What kind of diversion?" Samuel asked, grimacing as he shifted his injured arm. Jack reached into the back of the truck, pulling out a metal case secured beneath the rear seat. Inside were components that looked decidedly non-standard: blasting caps, remote detonators, and several blocks of what appeared to be C4 explosive. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Your paranoid previous owner was well equipped. Ex-military," Jack explained, assembling a simple device with practiced hands. "Believed the government was monitoring him, kept enough supplies to start his own small war if necessary." Samuel watched with growing concern. "You're not planning to collapse the mine, are you? Because I'm pretty sure that would kill us before it killed them." "Not the mine," Jack assured him. "Just create enough noise and debris to make them think we tried another route. Meanwhile, no, we use the confusion to slip past their perimeter." He worked quickly, creating 3 small charges with remote detonators. "I'll plant these at intervals along a side tunnel. When detonated, they should create the impression of someone blasting their way through a collapse. While we drive out the main entrance during the confusion," Eleanor concluded, nodding her approval of the tactic. Jack handed her the detonator. "Exactly. I'll need about 10 minutes to place the charges. Once I'm back, we wait for the right moment, then move all at once." The plan set, Jack disappeared into one of the side tunnels with the explosives. Eleanor kept watch at the main entrance, tracking the movements of the visible operative while scanning for others. Martha and Samuel remained with the truck, ready to move at a moment's notice. When Jack returned, his face was streaked with dust, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Charges are set. The first one is deep enough that it shouldn't trigger a major collapse, but it'll make enough noise to draw attention." They positioned the truck facing the exit, engine off but key in the ignition. Jack took the driver's seat, with Eleanor beside him, the detonator in her hand. Samuel and Martha braced themselves in the back. "On my mark," Jack said quietly, watching the operative outside shift position in the falling snow. 3, 2, 1. Mark. Eleanor pressed the button. A deep rumble echoed through the mine as the first charge detonated, followed seconds later by the second and third. Dust and debris filled the tunnel behind them, creating exactly the impression Jack had intended that someone was blasting their way through a collapse in another section of the mine. As predicted, the operative outside turned toward the sound, radioing to unseen colleagues. Jack seized the moment, starting the engine and gunning it toward the exit. The truck burst from the mine entrance in a shower of rocks and ice, catching the distracted operative completely by surprise. By the time the man recovered and brought his rifle to bear, they were already past him, accelerating down the canyon. A few shots rang out, striking the rear of the truck but causing no critical damage. "More at the canyon mouth," Eleanor warned, spotting two black-clad figures scrambling to set up a roadblock where the canyon opened into a wider valley. Jack didn't slow, driving straight toward them with grim determination. The operatives, realizing his intention, dove aside at the last moment rather than risk being crushed beneath the truck's reinforced bumper. They broke free of the canyon, emerging onto a snow-covered plateau. The helicopter was nowhere in sight, likely still searching the area where they had entered the mine. For the moment, at least, they had escaped the immediate threat. "Everyone okay?" Jack called, checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. Affirmative responses came from Eleanor and Martha. Samuel groaned softly, his face pale with pain. "I think my arm got jostled pretty good in that exit." Martha examined the injury with concern. "The brake has shifted. We need to get him to a doctor soon." Jack nodded, mentally calculating their position and options. "There's a small town about 20 miles south Powell. Might have a clinic or at least a pharmacy where we can get better supplies." "Is it safe?" Eleanor asked, still scanning for the helicopter or ground pursuit. "Nowhere's completely safe," Jack replied honestly. "But we need medical attention, and we need to regroup, figure out our next move." The decision made, Jack guided the truck across the plateau toward a Forest Service road visible in the distance. The storm was intensifying again, snow falling in thick curtains that limited visibility, but also concealed their passage. They reached Powell as dusk was settling, the small Wyoming town already battened down against the worsening weather. Christmas decorations hung from lampposts along the main street, a surreal reminder of normal life continuing despite their desperate circumstances. Jack located the town's modest medical clinic, its windows still lit despite the late hour. "I'll go in with Samuel," he decided. "Eleanor, you and Martha stay with the truck. Be ready to leave quickly if necessary." The clinic's lone doctor, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, asked few questions when they entered, with Samuel supported between them. Rural physicians in these remote areas were accustomed to treating injuries without excessive paperwork or explanation. "Broken humerus," she diagnosed after a brief examination. "Clean break, but it needs proper setting and a cast." She looked up at Jack. "What happened?" "Car accident," Jack replied, the partial truth easier to maintain than a complete fabrication. "Slid off the road in the storm." The doctor's expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but was pragmatic enough not to press. "It'll take about an hour to set and cast. You're welcome to wait, or come back." "We'll wait," Jack decided, not willing to risk separation. While the doctor worked on Samuel's arm, Jack used the clinic's landline to make a call not to any of their contacts, who might be under surveillance, but to an old friend from his Air Force days who had retired to a ranch near the Colorado border. "Mike, it's Jack Harmon," he said when a gruff voice answered. "Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I'm calling in that favor you owe me from Kandahar." The conversation was brief, deliberately vague, but when Jack hung up, his expression showed cautious relief. "We have a safe house," he told Eleanor when she came in to check on their progress, "about 100 miles from here, just across the Colorado line. Mike Davidson, pilot I served with back in the 80s. Says we can lay low there for a day or two while we arrange the meeting with your journalist contact." Eleanor nodded, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Good. We could all use a few hours rest before the final push." Samuel emerged from the treatment room, his arm properly set and encased in a blue fiberglass cast. The doctor followed, handing Jack a prescription for pain medication and antibiotics. "There's a pharmacy 2 blocks down," she said. "Still open for another hour. He needs to rest that arm and take the full course of antibiotics to prevent infection." Jack thanked her, paying in cash from the emergency funds he kept in the truck. As they prepared to leave, the doctor placed a hand on his arm. "Whatever trouble you folks are in," she said quietly, "be careful. There were some men asking questions at the diner across the street. Not locals. Didn't strike me as the friendly type." Jack's pulse quickened. "What kind of questions?" "About out-of-towners. Specifically, an older man traveling with a middle-aged woman, and possibly others." She held his gaze steadily. "I've been here 30 years. I know trouble when I see it. Those men, they're trouble." "Thank you," Jack said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "We'll be gone before they know we were here." The doctor nodded, then added, "Take the back exit, less visible from the street." They followed her advice, slipping out through the clinic's rear door into an alley that led to a parallel street. Jack sent Eleanor to retrieve the truck while he and Samuel waited in the shadows, watching for any sign of Victor's men. Martha joined them a few minutes later, her expression troubled. "I saw them," she whispered. "2 men in dark suits, showing a photo to people outside the diner. It looked like a picture of Eleanor." Jack wasn't surprised. As the former CFO of Westland, Eleanor would be the primary target, the one whose testimony could bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. His name might still be in Victor's files, but his face wouldn't be in their recognition software. Eleanor arrived with the truck, driving without headlights until they were safely inside. They circled around the back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare, and stopped briefly at the pharmacy's drive-through window to fill Samuel's prescriptions. As they were pulling away, Jack spotted a black sedan turning onto the street behind them. "We've got company," he warned, accelerating gradually to avoid drawing attention. "Don't look back." Eleanor checked the side mirror, her expression grim. "Same model as the one at the gas station. They're definitely Victor's people." "How did they find us so quickly?" Martha asked, fear evident in her voice. "Small town," Jack replied, taking a series of random turns to confirm they were being followed. "Not many strangers passing through during a winter storm. They probably checked every business in town until someone mentioned a man bringing in an injured companion." The sedan maintained its distance, neither closing the gap nor falling behind a surveillance technique designed to track without alerting the target. Jack recognized the approach from his military days. "They're waiting for backup," he concluded. "Probably called in our location and are just keeping eyes on us until reinforcements arrive." "What's the play?" Eleanor asked, checking her weapon discreetly. Jack considered their options, limited by Samuel's condition and the worsening weather. A high-speed chase through unfamiliar, snow-covered roads would be dangerous for everyone involved. Yet allowing themselves to be cornered when reinforcements arrived wasn't acceptable either. "We need to separate them from their vehicle," he decided, formulating a plan based on his knowledge of small-town layouts. "There should be a railroad crossing somewhere in town. Most of these places developed around the rail lines." Samuel, despite his pain, managed to check the map. 3 blocks ahead, then 2 to the right. Crosses Main Street. Jack nodded, taking the indicated turns. Sure enough, a railroad crossing appeared, the gates currently raised. More importantly, a train was visible in the distance, approaching the crossing. "Perfect," Jack murmured, timing their approach to coincide with the train's arrival. He slowed as they neared the crossing, allowing the sedan to close the distance slightly. When the warning bells began to ring and the gates started to lower, Jack gunned the engine, shooting across the tracks just before the gates descended completely. The sedan's driver, caught by surprise, was forced to brake hard, stopping just short of the closed gates as the train thundered past a long freight hauling coal or timber, its passage likely to take several minutes. "That buys us some time," Jack said, accelerating away from the crossing. "But they'll radio our direction to others. We need to switch vehicles." He drove to the edge of town, where a used car lot sat dark and closed for the night. Without hesitation, Jack pulled around to the back, out of sight from the main road. "We're stealing a car," Martha asked, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. "Borrowing," Jack corrected, though the distinction was largely semantic. "And we'll leave compensation." He extracted a thick envelope of cash from a hidden compartment under his seat, part of his emergency reserves. Eleanor was already examining the vehicles in the lot, looking for one suitable for their needs. "That's Suburban," she said, pointing to an older model SUV with four-wheel drive. "Big enough for all of us, decent condition, and common enough not to stand out." Jack nodded approval, using tools from his truck to quickly and efficiently bypass the Suburban's ignition system. Within minutes, the engine rumbled to life. He transferred their essential supplies, weapons, ammunition, the duffel containing their evidence, and Samuel's medication to the borrowed vehicle. Before leaving, he placed the envelope containing several $1,000s under the windshield wiper of his truck, along with a note, "Emergency borrowing of Suburban. This should cover costs plus inconvenience. Vehicle will be returned or abandoned at Powell Sheriff Station within 72 hours." It wasn't legal, but it was the best compromise between necessity and ethics that their situation allowed. With Eleanor at the wheel of the Suburban and Jack riding shotgun, they pulled away from the lot, taking back roads out of town to avoid any remaining operatives Victor might have positioned on the main routes. "Head south," Jack instructed. "Mike's place is about 100 miles, just across the Colorado border near a town called Walden. Remote enough to give us some breathing room, but close enough to Denver that we can reach your journalist contact when we're ready." As they left Powell behind, the storm intensified, snow swirling in the headlights. The weather that had complicated their escape now served as cover, obscuring their trail and making pursuit more difficult. For the first time since Eleanor had appeared at his workshop door, Jack allowed himself to think they might actually succeed. The journey to Mike Davidson's ranch took longer than expected, the roads increasingly treacherous as they climbed into higher elevations. Eleanor drove with the steady competence Jack had come to expect from her, navigating the slippery conditions without complaint. In the back seat, Martha tended to Samuel, ensuring he took his medication and monitoring his condition. The younger Hayes had fallen into an exhausted sleep, the painkillers finally providing relief from the constant agony of his broken arm. "Tell me about Brian," Jack said quietly, breaking the contemplative silence that had settled over the vehicle. "Not as a pilot, as a person." Martha looked up, surprise and something like gratitude flickering across her face. "He was full of life," she began hesitantly, as though unaccustomed to speaking of her son in personal terms rather than as a cause. "Always taking things apart as a child, wanting to understand how they worked. His father, God, rest his soul, used to say Brian would either be a brilliant engineer or the world's most thorough vandal." Jack smiled, imagining a younger version of Samuel with the same determined expression. "He loved flying from the first moment his father took him up in a crop duster," Martha continued, her voice warming with memory. "Said it was like becoming part of the machine, feeling the aircraft respond to him like an extension of his own body." "That's a born pilot talking," Jack said softly. "The best ones have that intuitive connection with their aircraft." Martha nodded, tears gathering in her eyes but not falling. After high school, the Air Force was the only path he ever considered. When he was selected for the test pilot program, he called me, so excited I could barely understand him. Said he was going to help shape the future of aviation. The unspoken ending hung between them instead. He had become a statistic, a name on a memorial wall, his potential forever unrealized. Jack felt the weight of responsibility anew, not just for the technical failure, but for the human cost that spreadsheets and technical reports could never capture. "He wouldn't blame you," Martha said, as though reading his thoughts. "From what Samuel has told me, you tried to stop the test. You put your career on the line to prevent what happened." "It wasn't enough," Jack replied, the old guilt resurfacing. "I should have done more, gone public, leaked the documents, something." and ended up discredited or worse, Eleanor interjected, her eyes never leaving the snowy road. Victor Chambers doesn't leave loose ends. Jack, the fact that he only ruined your career rather than arranging a more permanent solution suggests he still had some remnant of friendship for you back then. Jack knew she was right. In the decades since, he'd seen how whistleblowers were treated, careers destroyed, reputations shredded, some even facing criminal charges for exposing classified information. Still, the knowledge did little to ease the burden he'd carried for 35 years. "We're going to finish what you started," Martha said with quiet determination. "Brian's death won't be meaningless anymore. None of their deaths will be." The Suburban crested a final hill, revealing a valley below where lights glowed warmly against the snowy darkness. Mike Davidson's ranch sprawled across several hundred acres, the main house and outbuildings forming a rough semicircle around a central yard. As they approached, a figure emerged from the main house, silhouetted against the porch light. Mike Davidson stood waiting, a shotgun held casually but ready at his side, a precaution rather than a threat. At 65, he retained the straight-backed posture of his military days, though his once dark hair was now completely silver. Jack stepped out of the Suburban, hands visible. Still paranoid after all these years. "Mike," the rancher's weathered face broke into a grin. "Still attracting trouble?" "Jack." He lowered the shotgun, stepping forward to clasp Jack's hand firmly. "Been a long time." "Too long," Jack agreed. "Thanks for taking us in on short notice." Mike nodded, his expression growing serious as he took in the battered group emerging from the vehicle. "You said on the phone this was about making something right. Must be important to bring you out of that self-imposed exile up in Montana." "It is," Jack confirmed. "Remember the X-727 incident?" Mike's expression darkened. "Hard to forget. That was the beginning of the end for you." "The truth's finally coming out," Jack said simply. "And some powerful people are trying to make sure it doesn't." Mike surveyed the group again. Eleanor's alert, professional demeanor, Samuel's obvious injury, Martha's quiet dignity. He seemed to come to a decision. "Well, any enemy of the military-industrial complex is a friend of mine," he declared, gesturing toward the house. "Come on in. Got plenty of room, a decent first aid kit, and enough supplies to last through the apocalypse." As they followed Mike inside, out of the howling wind and stinging snow, Jack felt a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying begin to ease. They weren't safe, not by a long shot, but for the first time in their desperate journey. They had reached a temporary haven where they could rest, regroup, and prepare for the final phase of their mission. The ranch house was warm and surprisingly spacious, its rustic exterior belying modern comforts within. Mike showed them to guest rooms, ensuring Samuel was comfortable before leading the others to the kitchen where coffee and a simple meal awaited. "Place is off-grid," he explained, pouring steaming coffee into mugs. "Solar, wind, and a backup generator. No connections to trace, and the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. You can lay low here as long as you need." Jack introduced Eleanor and Martha properly, explaining their roles in the unfolding situation without going into classified details. Mike listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. "So the great Senator Chambers is actually a corporate criminal willing to let people die for profit," he summarized when Jack finished. "Can't say I'm surprised. Power corrupts, and he's had plenty of both for a long time." "We have evidence," Eleanor explained, patting her briefcase. "Financial records, internal memos, engineering reports. Enough to prove both the original cover-up and the ongoing fraud. But we need to get it to the right people," Jack added. "People who can't be bought or intimidated. And we need to do it before Victor's security teams catch up with us." Mike considered this, fingers drumming thoughtfully on the table. "I might be able to help with that. Got a friend who flies for a news helicopter in Denver. Could get you into the city without using roads Victor's people are watching. A helicopter would be faster than driving, and it would bypass any roadblocks or checkpoints Victor might have established." It was a solid option, assuming Mike's friend could be trusted. When could he be here? Eleanor asked. Tomorrow afternoon, if the weather clears, Mike replied. I'll make the call in the morning. For now, you all need rest. Been a long day from the looks of it. He wasn't wrong. The events since Eleanor's arrival at Jack's workshop felt like weeks ago, rather than barely 48 hours. Exhaustion was taking its toll on all of them, dulling reflexes and clouding judgment. Dangerous conditions when their lives depended on staying sharp. 4 hour, Jack decided. We sleep in shifts, 2 awake at all times. I'll take first watch with Mike. Eleanor nodded agreement, finishing her coffee before heading to check on Samuel. Martha followed shortly after, the strain of the day evident in her tired steps, alone with his old friend. Jack allowed some of his carefully maintained composure to slip. I'm not sure we're going to make it, Mike, he admitted quietly. Victor has resources we can't match. People everywhere. It's only a matter of time before he finds us. Mike refilled their coffee cups, adding a splash of whiskey to each. You always were a pessimist, Jack. Even back in the day, he settled into a chair opposite. But you're also the most stubborn son of a bitch I ever flew with. If anyone can see this through, it's you. Jack smiled faintly at the backhanded encouragement. Maybe, but I'm not the same man you knew. 35 years of hiding from the world changes a person. Does it? Mike challenged. Seems to me you're still fighting the same battle, trying to do what's right despite the cost. That's the Jack Harmon I remember. They fell into companionable silence, the howling wind outside contrasting with the warmth and temporary safety of the ranch house. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But for now, they had found a moment of respite in the storm. As Jack sipped his whiskey-laced coffee, watching the snow dance in the security lights outside, he allowed himself to consider something he had avoided for decades, a future beyond isolation. If they succeeded, if the truth finally came to light, what then would there be a place for him in the world he had fled so long ago? The question remained unanswered as the night deepened around the ranch house, the storm gradually weakening as it spent its fury against the mountains. By morning, decisions would need to be made, risks taken. But in this quiet moment between crises, Jack found himself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation: hope. The Montana winter returned, as it always does, bearing the scars of the past beneath pristine white. But some changes run deeper than seasons. In a small courthouse in Washington, Martha Collins stands straight-backed as 35 years of letters and petitions culminate in a single moment of vindication. Her son's name, finally cleared. Not just a statistic anymore, but a hero who exposed the truth through his sacrifice. Samuel Hayes touches the silver wings pinned to his lapel, his brother's wings, as he boards a plane to teach a new generation of pilots that courage means speaking up, even when the sky is falling. Eleanor Reed walks free under the weight of immunity agreements and corporate depositions, her briefcase lighter now that its secrets have found their rightful place in the public record. And somewhere in the quiet backcountry, Jack Harmon's workshop light still burns through the night. The old mechanic's hands still repair what others discard as broken, finding purpose in restoration. But now his door stands slightly ajar, no longer sealed against the world outside. Time doesn't heal all wounds. Some it merely transforms into something we can carry. The question was never whether the truth would surface, but what we would become in the waiting, and whether, when that moment arrived, we would still recognize ourselves in the mirror. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but perhaps in the trying, we find our way home.